He married her on a quiet Saturday, under a borrowed canopy and borrowed smiles, and the vows were said quickly, as if lingering too long might invite doubt. Ada stood beside him in a borrowed lace dress that smelled faintly of starch and someone else's perfume, her hands trembling with a mix of joy and fear she did not yet understand. Tunde smiled for the pictures, smiled for the pastor, smiled for the relatives who whispered about how lucky she was. Ada believed marriage meant alignment, two lives braided together against the weight of the world. Tunde believed marriage meant order, a structure that would steady his life while leaving room for his impulses to roam. The first months were quiet in a way that felt safe. They lived in a modest flat with walls that trapped heat and sound, and Ada learned the rhythms of his mornings and nights. She woke before him, ironed his shirts, packed his food, kissed his forehead when he pretended to still be asleep. Tunde liked order. He liked knowing where things were, liked coming home to food, liked the way marriage made him look settled. Ada mistook his satisfaction for love and leaned deeper into it, filling the house with care, smoothing every rough edge she could find. The changes began so softly they almost passed for maturity. Phone calls started ending when she entered the room. Messages were typed with the screen tilted away. Dinners stretched later and later. Excuses delivered with a tired sigh about work pressure and expectations. Ada asked once, carefully, and Tunde laughed, telling her she worried too much. She apologized for doubting him. Love, she believed, required restraint, required swallowing discomfort before it could grow teeth. Weeks folded into months. The air between them shifted, not violently, but like furniture moved a few inches every day until nothing felt familiar. Tunde stopped asking about her day. He stopped noticing when she braided her hair differently or cooked his favorite meal. He began correcting her tone, her timing, her presence. Ada adjusted herself constantly, shrinking questions, smoothing reactions, trying to find the version of herself that did not irritate him. She told herself this was marriage, that endurance was a form of commitment. The truth did not announce itself with confrontation. It crept in through observation. Ada noticed that Tunde's absences followed a pattern, that certain days carried more urgency than others. She noticed how carefully he dressed on evenings he claimed were stressful, how his irritation sharpened if she asked where he was going. She noticed the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, faint but persistent, like a warning written in smoke. Still, she said nothing. Speaking without proof felt like sabotage, and she had been trained to protect the marriage at all costs. The proof came without drama, without secrecy, without shame. It came in public. At a large family gathering held in a relative's compound, Ada moved through the crowd carrying plates and greeting elders, performing the quiet labor expected of her. She felt tired but proud, standing in her role as wife, believing her place was secure. Then she saw Tunde across the yard, standing straighter than usual, his smile polished and deliberate. Beside him stood a woman dressed with confidence that did not ask permission. Her body leaned toward him as if it belonged there. When relatives approached, Tunde gestured toward the woman and introduced her as someone important, his voice smooth, unquestioning. Ada stood frozen with plates balanced in her hands, watching the woman receive nods and interest, watching herself fade into the background. No one announced the shift. No one explained it. It simply happened. In that moment, Ada understood not that she had been cheated on, but that she had been repositioned. Her marriage had not ended. It had been restructured without her consent. The rest of the day unfolded with cruel normalcy. The woman laughed easily, sat near Tunde, spoke with authority. Ada served food, cleaned up, answered questions that barely acknowledged her status. The humiliation did not scream. It settled quietly, heavy and suffocating. She returned home that night with Tunde walking ahead of her, speaking casually, as if nothing had changed. Ada followed, carrying the weight of clarity she had never wanted. After that day, the rules appeared. Tunde began monitoring her movements, asking where she was going, who she spoke to, why she took so long at the market. He framed his control as concern, his restrictions as responsibility. He rationed his presence, offering affection only when she complied easily. Any resistance was labeled disrespect. Ada noticed the imbalance clearly now. Expectations multiplied for her while his freedom expanded without explanation. She lived inside a contract she had never signed. The woman became a shadow in their lives, not hidden, but carefully unnamed. Ada sensed her influence in decisions, in absences, in Tunde's sudden confidence. When Ada tried to discuss the growing distance, Tunde dismissed her concerns, accusing her of insecurity. He reminded her of her position, of how much he provided, of how easily she could be replaced. The threat was delivered casually, without anger, which made it more terrifying. Ada's world narrowed. She woke each day calculating how to avoid conflict, how to remain useful. She stopped sharing her thoughts. She stopped hoping for intimacy. She watched herself become invisible in a space she had helped build. The realization arrived slowly but firmly. She was now the side chick in her own marriage, competing silently for scraps of attention in a home that no longer recognized her authority. The breaking point did not come with shouting or violence. It came with exhaustion. One evening, Ada sat alone in the living room, the fan humming above her, the walls pressing in. Tunde had not come home. She did not know where he was, and for the first time, she did not care. Something inside her loosened. The fear that had kept her compliant dissolved into clarity. She saw the future stretching ahead of her, endless negotiation, endless diminishment, endless auditioning for a role that should have been hers by right. The vision was unbearable. She stood, went into the bedroom, and opened the wardrobe. She packed quietly, methodically, choosing only what she could carry without struggle. Each item folded felt like a small reclamation. She did not cry. Tears would have delayed her. She left before dawn, locking the door behind her with a calm she had never known. When Tunde returned later and found the house stripped of her presence, panic finally broke through his certainty. He called repeatedly, his voice shifting from irritation to confusion to fear. Ada answered once. She did not argue. She did not accuse. She did not beg. She told him the truth plainly. She reminded him of who she had been in his life and who she refused to become. Her voice did not shake. When she ended the call, she felt something settle inside her, solid and unmovable. Ada did not look back. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were honest. She stayed with a friend at first, then found a small place of her own. She worked harder than she ever had, rebuilding her independence piece by piece. The silence that once felt oppressive became restorative. She slept without fear of interruption. She ate without anxiety. She moved through her days without adjusting herself for someone else's appetite. Tunde tried again, offering apologies shaped by regret, promising change without evidence. Ada listened once more, not with hope, but with closure. She recognized the pattern clearly now, the hunger that would never be satisfied, the stability that existed only to enable desire. She declined without bitterness. As time passed, the humiliation that once burned her softened into wisdom. She understood that she had not failed at marriage. She had survived misplacement. She had mistaken endurance for virtue and silence for strength. Leaving taught her the difference. Ada rebuilt her life deliberately. She chose peace over performance, clarity over comfort. The world did not applaud her decision. Some called her proud. Some called her impatient. She accepted their words without absorbing them. She knew what she had escaped. Years later, when memory surfaced, they no longer hurt. They reminded her of the moment she chose herself without apology. She had been a wife. She had been reduced. She had been silent. And then she had been free. She never auditioned for her own life again. Ada's leaving did not collapse the house immediately. It unsettled it. 4 days after she left, the rooms remained arranged the way she had kept them. The chairs stayed aligned. The kitchen stayed clean. The silence felt temporary, like a pause before she returned. Tunde moved through the space with irritation rather than fear, stepping over the absence as if it were clutter that would eventually be cleared. He told himself she was being dramatic, that she would come back once the weight of reality pressed against her. He had seen this pattern before in other people's marriages. Women left. Women returned. Stability always won. But as the days stretched on, something began to unravel. Meals no longer appeared without effort. Clothes piled up. Small inconveniences multiplied into persistent disruptions. The order he loved no longer existed unless he created it himself, and he was unaccustomed to that kind of attention. The house stopped feeling like a place of rest and started feeling like a reminder. Ada's absence was no longer quiet. It was accusatory. The woman who had stood beside him so confidently sensed the shift almost immediately. She had admired his composure, his authority, the way he seemed firmly planted in his life. What she encountered instead was a man irritated by disruption, impatient with demands, easily destabilized by responsibility. The charm that once felt effortless now required maintenance. The certainty she had leaned into began to flicker. She wanted more presence, more assurance, more priority. The very things Ada had once asked for quietly. Tunde found himself repeating old patterns, rationing time, deflecting expectations, retreating into excuses. What he had once called appetite now felt like pressure. The stability he believed marriage guaranteed had never been self-sustaining. It had been built and maintained by Ada's invisible labor. Without it, everything felt heavier. Arguments surfaced where harmony once existed. The woman questioned him openly. She demanded clarity, legitimacy, future plans. She wanted recognition without shadows. Tunde responded with irritation, reminding her of patience, of timing, of understanding. He used the same language he had once used on Ada, unaware that it had never been convincing, only exhausting. What unsettled him most was not conflict, but comparison. Ada had never needed to demand space. She had created it. She had never required reassurance. She had offered trust freely. Her silence had not been weakness. It had been generosity. And generosity, once withdrawn, leaves a vacuum that cannot be filled by entitlement. The realization arrived too late to be useful. Meanwhile, Ada's life unfolded without drama but with intention. The early days were difficult. Independence required discipline. Loneliness appeared in waves, especially at night, when the world slowed and memory grew louder. But even in those moments, she felt something she had not felt in years: ownership of herself. She took work that demanded her attention fully, work that rewarded effort rather than submission. She rebuilt routines from scratch, choosing how she spent her mornings, what she cooked, how she rested. The freedom felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing new shoes that had not yet shaped her feet. But gradually, it became natural. She noticed changes in herself that surprised her. She laughed more easily. She spoke without rehearsing. She stopped measuring her worth by usefulness. The habits of self-erasure did not vanish overnight, but they weakened with each decision she made solely for herself. People asked questions. Some were curious. Some were judgmental. Ada learned to answer without explanation. Her story did not require validation. She had lived it fully. That was enough. Time passed. The sharpness of memory dulled into clarity. She could recall the marriage without flinching now, could see it as a structure built on imbalance rather than affection. She recognized her own complicity without shame. She had not known better then. She did now. Tunde, on the other hand, found clarity far less comforting. The relationship he had elevated began to mirror the dissatisfaction he thought he had escaped. Stability proved conditional. Appetite proved costly. The woman demanded legitimacy, not secrecy. She wanted to move forward. He found himself hesitant, calculating, suddenly aware of consequences he had previously ignored. When the relationship fractured, it did not do so quietly. Accusations surfaced. Words sharpened. Resentment spilled. The ease he had enjoyed disappeared completely, replaced by constant negotiation. He realized with bitter irony that the very chaos he had claimed Ada brought into his life had followed him anyway. It was during one of these moments, alone, unsettled, confronted by the emptiness of his choices, that Tunde reached for his phone and scrolled through old messages. Ada's name appeared less often now, buried beneath time and avoidance. He stared at it longer than he intended. The urge to reach out returned, not with entitlement, but with uncertainty. When he contacted her again, months after her departure, his message carried a different tone. There was no command in it, no assumption. Only the suggestion of regret, carefully worded, fragile. Ada read it once and set the phone down. She did not respond immediately. Not because she was tempted, but because she wanted to be honest with herself. She examined the feeling his words stirred and found it lacking the urgency she once would have felt. The space she had built inside herself did not collapse at his reappearance. It held. When she eventually replied, her words were brief and measured. She acknowledged the past without reopening it. She wished him clarity without offering access. The boundary was not dramatic. It was firm. That was the last time they spoke. Ada continued forward, not chasing redemption, not performing healing, simply living with awareness. She entered new spaces carefully, no longer impressed by promises, no longer flattered by attention that required compromise. She recognized appetite disguised as affection. She recognized stability that demanded self-erasure. She chose differently. Her life did not transform into spectacle. There were no sudden rewards, no public vindication. What she gained was quieter and far more enduring. She gained consistency. She gained rest. She gained herself. Years later, when she reflected on the moment she left, she understood that it had not been an act of bravery fueled by anger. It had been an act of clarity sustained by silence. She had not needed to punish anyone. She had simply refused to continue participating in her own diminishment. The marriage did not end with noise. It ended with a decision. Ada had entered it believing partnership meant facing the world together. She left knowing partnership that requires disappearance is not partnership at all. She had been a wife. She had been reduced. She had been quiet. And then she had chosen permanence over appetite, dignity over endurance, and selfhood over stability. That choice did not echo loudly, but it changed everything.